I move around a lot. I apologize, so I'll try to keep going here. First, show of hands if you think AI is moving fast. All right, we'll talk about that today. It's gonna move faster. My kind of overarching theme here is to just kind of get ready. There's three things that I hope you take away from this. One is, without a good foundation, AI is just going to mess it up. So AI is not a silver bullet. And the data you're looking at has to be a part of your foundation. AI is more than a tagline, so it gets talked about a ton, and really thinking about how do you work that across the org. And then a little bit of everybody just calm down. Don't get caught up in the hype. Pick the stuff that you want to focus on. It's really easy to get overwhelmed. A little about me personally, run global head or global data, digital AI at Greystar. Prior to that's a picture of me on a bike. I like to ride bikes and live outside. Prior to Greystar, I spent my life in tech. So I'm not, if you couldn't tell from the white t-shirt, from the t-shirt and white sneakers, I'm not a real estate person. I come from a tech background. Back to the speed of AI, everybody I'm around in Silicon Valley and at companies that have done this is all overwhelmed at how fast this is going. So if you're overwhelmed at how fast it's going, how many new tools are coming out, that's okay. And what I keep saying to myself and everyone else is like, it's just going to keep going faster. And even faster in the last, I'm thinking in the last 2 months, man, it's even going to go faster than I thought 3-4 months ago. So rather than try to figure out when does it slow down and we can just settle in, just figure out how to get used to the weather, right? When's the weather going to change? Like, my advice is like, let's figure out just how to get used to the weather and how to focus and know what to work on. And this is a quote I always go back to. This is Kevin Wheel from OpenAI, which says, the model we're using today is the worst model we'll use in the rest of our life. And he's referring to the ChatGPT, the LLM model. So if you think about that, right, this didn't exist 2.5 years ago, right? And it's the worst it's ever going to be. So it's going to go faster. It's going to evolve quicker. It's going to do more. So we have to figure out, how do we actually just start to make sense of this and kind of read signal through the noise. And one more thing on this before we kind of get into the data part of it. This is real. So I've lived through 4 cycles. I've lived through the mobile cycle, pre-phones. I've lived through cloud. I've lived through crypto. The first 2 were real. Crypto, I still own some Bitcoin, but that wasn't exactly like a real going to reinvent everything. We thought there for a moment. AI is more real than anything I've ever lived through. So you can't ignore it. You can't say, oh, it's another bubble. It's going to happen. Like what we do know now is that this is going to change everything. So I am more excited. I've been doing this for 20-something years. I'm more excited than I've ever been. It's also more uncertain than it's ever been. We're using tools today that may be the tools of the future that may be gone, right? Is this Netscape or is this Chrome or something like that? So just keep that in mind as we go. But this is a real moment. We have to take advantage of it. We have to figure out how we operate in it. If your data's a mess, AI is not going to fix it. Right? So there's a lot of excitement around testing new tools. There's a lot of excitement. We hear owners saying, I want to try this, I want to try that. We're trying to take a very methodical look at what are the workflows that matter in the business? What are the things that we think we need to do to improve for our owners? And that's the same advice I would give you, is like, block out the noise. There's going to be a new tool every 30 seconds, every 30 days. Our job is to figure out what matters to my business. What do I need to do to be successful? And the core foundation of this is your data, right? And this can be the data at a central level, right? This can be, what kind of data warehouse are you working with? How are you aggregating systems, bringing them together? This could be data at a very specific level. If you're testing a tool, know what you're testing. Know what the data is that's coming in. Know what your workflow data is today. And then what are you trying to get out of that? And I see over and over people just plugging stuff in. We're trying it. AI is going to fix it. And if you don't understand what your baseline is, what your data is today, what the data you're measuring is, and what that's going to be, you're not really going to know. And you're going to get sold data by a vendor who's going to tell you, they're all going to tell you their data is the best. Right? You have to know how to measure your own data. So that's something that we've spent a lot of time with, because every vendor is going to come in, every partner is going to show you the reports on how their data automates and reduces hours, and most of them do. But if you don't actually know what your data is to start, and if you don't have good quality, clean data that you can depend on, you're just going to get whipsawed into different results and different pilots and trying stuff out that way. There's kind of 3 ways I think about data. There's architecture, there's ownership, and there's trust, right? So do you have the right architecture for the future? This is a big question right now. And this is another one that's really scary because how do you choose, right? So this is where we have to find that balance between placing educated bets and then also not moving too fast. But the architecture of how your data is set up, everything's going to change over the next, some number of years. So again, do you have the right structure to enable change, to be flexible, to enable different agents, to enable different APIs? Be flexible in how you're thinking about architecture. Ownership, data. I was just listening to one of the keynotes, and they asked, what are the big questions or big things you have going forward? What's going to look like in 2030 in our industry? And everything was the balance of tech. Everyone's answer on stage was the companies that succeed are going to balance technology with human interaction, right? And I have been around. I kind of joke that I'm not a real estate person, but I've been around the space for a while. I think no one questions right now whether or not technology, AI, data is going to matter in this business. I think if you went back 5 or 10 years ago, you might have people saying like, well, we can do it. It's about the people. People matter, but now we know that our data is going to matter. So how are you set up from an ownership structure in your company, in your organization? How important is it? What access do those people have? And those two things build trust, right? So you have to build trust in data, in the information that you have, and you have to have a system and a process that helps you build that. This is another. I like quotes. My daughters roll their eyes when I share quotes all the time. But a steering committee is not an AI strategy. So again, do you have the right people working on it? Do you have the right setup? And do you have the right leadership? So this is, as a startup person, I've been at a lot of companies. So I've probably done, I have to go back to the logos. I think Graystar is my 6th or 7th company in 25 years. Leadership is tops down. Doesn't matter. I've seen enough examples of it. It doesn't matter what people are saying in the organization. If you don't have leadership saying, hey, this matters, we're going to invest in it, it's not going to change. So this needs to be something that kind of comes from the top, and that you have people, at the highest level saying, this matters, we're going to try the new tools, we want everyone to be AI forward. That's the beginning, and that's where it kind of cascades down. If you don't have that, go get it. Talk to your boss, talk to your CEO, talk to your boss's boss, whatever. But that's my biggest advice, is that you want this to be it's, again, you can go back to was this a time when companies were, is everybody using email? Is everybody using mobile phones? Are we adapting to this new world? This has to be a tops down leadership decision, because if it's not, it just kind of falls flat. From leadership, then you get into org structure. You get into, okay, are you actually helping accelerate what's going on, or are you creating a bottleneck? So again, the old model was this sort of, centralized IT, but then you have these pods broken out. So really, can you get an organizational structure that makes you flexible? And that's really the biggest piece that I would say over and over and again is speed and flexibility are going to be an asset, which is really hard in technology. It's hard when you think about investments. It's hard when you think about what partners are you gonna kind of get together with. But it's changing so fast that we have to remain flexible. You still have to make decisions. You still have to run your business. So I think that's always the challenging part. There's 3 ways that I think about what AI can do, and I like the first 2 the most. Augment or automate, right? So automation is what everyone gets excited about. This is all the media loves to talk about. Robots are going to take our jobs. AI is going to take our jobs. Automation is a really interesting one, because what I've seen a lot early on is it's really easy to go automate a really bad process, right? So a lot of the processes that we have maybe are the wrong processes. They've just evolved over time, or they were actually designed for people. And so if you're going to automate that, well, you shouldn't necessarily, you certainly don't want to automate a bad process. You also don't want to automate something that was designed maybe for a human to do that you would do differently if you were designing it for an AI agentic experience. So when you think about automation, do not automate a bad process. I've seen projects spin up where people get excited, they start building stuff, and then you look at it and you're like, wait a minute, this was kind of the wrong process to begin with. So, but automation is going to get a ton of attention. Augmentation is, for everyone here, if you're using ChatGPT or Claude, that's your augmentation, right? You're using it to help yourself do things, and you're finding that balance between how can I make someone more efficient at what they do versus how can I take away something that they're doing. And then preparation. This is sort of the more natural state. This is sort of, using AI as the way that you just kind of think through things. I use it a ton as a thought partner. But again, back to the company standpoint, Do you have your data set up? Do you have everything structured the right way? So what I'm able to do with a lot of my AI tools exists because we've invested a ton in our data architecture, our data structure, so that I'm getting clean information, I'm getting clean connectivity, so that then the AI can do it. If you have bad data, all these things break because you're just plugging, you're essentially plugging a genius model on top of fragmented data or bad data or non-validated data, things you don't trust, and it's going to make it worse, not better. This is my quote, again, back to quotes. And I realize I'm talking fast. We have like 9 minutes left, so I'll save some time for Q&A too at the end. But this is just my reminder of like all the stuff you're hearing and reading, like nobody knows how this is going to play out. What we know is that it's going to be massive, that it's going to change everything. But don't pretend when you hear people saying this is going to happen or that's going to happen. Like we're so early in this cycle. If you've been watching what's going on with Claude recently, right? There's no way I would have said 3 months ago that Claude would surpass OpenAI or ChatGPT as a tool. It is, if you're not using Claude, I think it's better. But that, again, 90 days ago, I would never have predicted that. So do we know that Claude's going to be the winner in 6-8 months? We kind of don't. So again, know your business, do what's right. But build the foundation, right? Focus on this moment that we have. Focus on this opportunity when it is moving fast, when there are new tools, to figure out your system and your process. And part of this is your system and your process for how do we evaluate tools? How do we evaluate if our data is any good? How do we actually come up with a rubric to decide? Because as I said in the beginning, it's going to go faster. So the notion isn't waiting for the weather to change and figure out how it just kind of mellows. The notion is like, how do we succeed in this new ecosystem? And so even if all you did right now is say, hey, we're going to come up with a method where we can understand how do we trust our data, what are the decisions we have to make today versus tomorrow, and how do we evaluate these tools and our data to figure out how they're going to help us, that's a huge leap forward than just, hey, we got to try this tool, we got to try that tool, I heard about this, I talked to someone who loved this tool. What are the workflows you have? What are the pain points you have? And what's a way to start to decide what you can do? There is a wait and see model. I've heard people say this, like, let's just pull back. I think that exists in some places, but not as an overarching strategy. So again, as a business, you have to be leaning into this. You have to be thinking about it. Are there areas where maybe you should take more of a wait and see? That goes back to that rubric. That goes back to what's my business? What's the way that I'm organized? What matters to me? And then what are the decisions I have to make today versus ones that I can potentially put off? So again, probably not new to this group, but there's kind of 3 areas that I think about when you think about where's this gonna impact. Prospects, the whole search experience is changing. How people find apartments, how they talk to apartments, where you get information, right? Are you going to Google? Are you going to ChatGPT? Again, this is super new. Like everybody, I feel like 3-4 months ago, it was all about ChatGPT apps, all the data on that. If you look at the data on Google, they're still doing pretty well, right? What we don't know is when's it going to shift. I think everybody in this room would say, at some point, you're not getting blue links to look for a property. You're talking to an AI, and the majority of people will do that. We don't really know if that's in a year, 18 months, or 4 years. Residents, I think, are going to drive a lot of the adoption here because similar to mobile, right? Residents are going to be using and already are using really advanced, really elegant tools around AI, and they're going to expect that in their experience, right? So I think they're going to drive a lot of this for us because it's the same as mobile was when it came out. It's like, why can't I do this on my phone, right? If you're operating a system on a property and it's a really archaic system and I got to go through some crappy chat interface, like my banking chatbot from 1976, that resident's not going to tolerate that. They're just going to expect, because they're in ChatGPT all day long. They're in these devices. They're talking to a really elegant, really smart AI. So the bar is going to get really high really quick. And then from an owner standpoint, again, I think this is where that overarching strategy, how do you want to set yourself up for the future? What do your properties look like? What does your portfolio look like? What does your data look like? Because without that foundation, none of the rest of it's going to matter. And you're just going to start to convince yourself that like, oh, it's not working. We tried these pilots. But really a lot of it, when we see stuff not work, it comes back to what's that data foundation? That's all I got. We got a few minutes, so I don't know if they're all questions. We got 5, so I can take some questions if there's any. I think so. The question, if you couldn't hear the back, question was talking about silos because real estate tends to be more siloed. How does AI kind of mitigate that? AI is going to create more problems before it solves more problems, I think, in that area. So first off, this goes back to what's the architecture, what's the setup is really important. Today, if you have disparate systems, there's a need to combine that and get your data kind of together and get it in a side, but you still have all these multiple systems together. Tomorrow, AI is going to be able to connect some of those systems, but not enough that you can just say, you know what, screw it, we're just going to wait a few years until AI gets there. So I think it'll solve some problems around connectivity and kind of the different systems that we use, but not enough. I've kind of thought about this a lot. I wish it was enough that you could just say, like, you know what, let's just wait a minute. Because you're also going to need to have your own kind of validation of those systems. So I think it'll make it worse before it gets better, I guess is my answer. That's kind of my pitch. The question was, what's the pitch to leadership? My pitch is it's coming for us whether we like it or not. And that's really it. It's like, hey, this is the next, Graystar's been around for 30 years, and I'm just like, the next 10 years are not going to look anything like the last 10 years. And so the pitch to leadership is like, hey, this is coming whether you like it or not. And there's examples, if you have to sell it hard, there's examples around. You can look at the adoption rate, go look at the adoption curve for ChatGPT versus everything else that's ever happened, right? It's a whole new world. So that's really that it's kind of coming for us, whether we like it or not. All right. Thanks, folks.